Hello, and welcome to the pre-recorded lecture from Module 4 of Literature and Technology, which I have entitled Exploiting Technology and Exploiting Technology. And repeating the title in that way highlights that it is possible for humans to exploit technology. So we benefit by exploiting technology. And yet at the same time, this technology can exploit humans. It becomes exploiting technology. So within that parameter, we're going to be looking at two radically different texts. Norbert Wiener's 1954 book, The Human Use of Human Beings, and a relatively recent cinematic release called Ex Machina. The progress of today's talk will discuss the figure of Norbert Wiener and his first book from 1948, Cybernetics. I include this because he is considered the father of cybernetics, one of the originators of the field. And just a couple of considerations of this work will enable us to approach the human use of human beings with better understanding of what it is he is describing, and in particular what it is he is warning us about. And then with regard to Ex Machina, which I hope that you did enjoy, we'll just be looking at the characters, a little bit about the structure. I want to leave a lot of room for discussion here when we get to the seminar Tuesday night and Friday morning, and then obviously the comparison with Blade Runner and the contrast with Blade Runner is quite remarkable. So we'll go through that, but try to have that portion of the handout completed before you watch that part of this lecture. Okay, Norbert Wiener, an absolutely, literally, an amazing figure. I believe his father was a classics scholar, also a college professor. He went to Harvard University and was done while he was still basically a child or a teenager. And he was employed in the First and Second World War, mostly. During the First World War, he was mostly concerned with artillery, parabolas of long-distance cannons. But in the Second World War, he was set to work on an anti-aircraft gun, and that is that if you are shooting a flying object, it is important that the projectile and the object that you're shooting at occupy the same space at the same time, which means that you require a bit of predictive power to guess where that airplane is going to be by the time that your bullet is there to meet it. And Wiener essentially put algorithms between the shooter of the gun and the aiming of the barrel of the gun toward the aircraft with a high degree of success. He also was tangentially involved in the discovery of radar and being able to locate enemy airplanes as they were coming into Great Britain. It is helpful to think of his early work as creating a filter that had a kind of a predictive power, but most importantly is that in every communication act there is an element of noise, and if you have enough communication acts, the noise will essentially be so prominent that the message is no longer intelligible. So his work is to remove noise from the system, amplify the positive signals, and then put in a certain amount of probability algorithms to increase success. That's the work he did with the anti-aircraft guns anyway. During and after the war, he was very much concerned with communications between human beings and machines. The Second World War is full of examples of interfaces between humans and the actionable use of munitions in particular. The Norton bomb site is a very celebrated example. The use of radar, another example, and the anti-aircraft cannon that I mentioned before. So where Wiener comes into history is where computing machines and electrical networks are in essence imitating the human nervous systems, and they later were studied in connection with the human nervous system. See his discussion of the moth and the bed bug automatons in chapter 10 of the human use of the human being. But most of this theory is valuable to Wiener and indeed humanity by showing how the human nervous system can be successfully integrated into the electrical mechanical system. For instance, the anti-aircraft gun. And what this is enabling, and you see it quite clearly in chapters 9, mostly in chapter 10 of the human use of human being, is that the more the human nervous system gets integrated into this computational signal matrix, the greater the risk of its co-optation, being completely absorbed and not being able to exercise its moral judgment, or complete and utter replacement, which I will get to by the end of this talk. Cybernetics is primarily a communication theory, the use of communication for control. And in this matrix, in this theoretical setup, messages may be transmitted electrically, mechanically, or via the human nervous system. But the important element here is the recognition and exploitation of the fact that the human being is integrated in part of the signal matrix of a machine. From cybernetics, the many automata of the present age are coupled to the outside worlds, both for the reception of impressions and the performance of actions. They contain sense organs, effectors, and the equivalent of a nervous system to integrate the transfer of information from the one to the other. They lend themselves very well to description in physiological terms. It is scarcely a miracle that they can be subsumed under one theory with the mechanisms of physiology. Okay, there's a lot here, but I'd like to unpack a couple of them. First of all, the automata, the machine, they receive impressions, so they have sense organs, and they perform tasks. They have a job to do. They contain sense organs, switches, and the equivalent of a nervous system to integrate the transfer of information from the one to the other. In a very minor sense, these machines can learn by what they see, hear, or feel. And in particular, they lend themselves very well to description in physiological terms. In other words, we may think of automata, we may think of robots, and the tasks they perform the same way that one would think of an animal. One would think of an organic being performing the same task. It is scarcely a miracle that they can be subsumed under one theory with the mechanisms of physiology. Indeed, they can, but by the time he finished the second and final version of the human use of human beings, we already are thinking of physiology, that is the organic body, in terms of the mechanisms of the automata, in terms of the mechanisms of the electrical switch, the feedback mechanism, or, to put it simply, of the computer. Continuing now to the book that came out shortly after that, 1950, and then revised in 1954, The Human Use of Human Beings. You can see already in the title that there is a tension that has been brought on by the promise of automation, because the human use of human beings would be the opposite of the inhuman use of human beings, something that Norbert Wiener was at would take great cost to avoid. For instance, he refused to work on nuclear weapons research, and this pretty much put a hamper in his career. So much like cybernetics, this book is a discussion of concrete applications of system theory to practical problems presented at the level of the educated layperson. In other words, this book, unlike cybernetics, which gets into math and formulae by page 47 and never stops thereafter, the human use of human beings has no equations within it, and it is directed to the educated layperson. This would be the head of a factory, the non-specialist university professor, people within finance, even your middle-of-the-road educators, such as high school teachers. The language may seem a bit cramped and awkward to us today, but if you really settle down with a good cup of coffee and get through each sentence and are not stymied by the frequent references to things that were generally known to the educated layperson in 1950, but not generally known to us today, if you get past those elements, it is a very lucid text. This systems theory element, from Norbert Wiener's perspective, is very much focused on the act of communication. And much of his work in cybernetics was about entropy, the breakdown of order into chaos, which can be experienced in a communications network. A, a rather banal example that I could use here would be the game of telephone that you can play in a second or third grade classroom, where you have 20 pupils sitting in a circle, and you whisper a sentence into one pupil's ear, and they have to whisper it around in turn all the way. And in this respect, a very simple expression like research laboratory can turn into orange-green Labrador. And that change in the signal from research laboratory to orange-green Labrador, that is an instance of this signal entropy. And one of the causes of that entropy is noise. That's the characteristic of any communication system. And much of Wiener's work was done with amplification to strengthen a signal that is fading and cleaning it up. So he's very much a communication theorist, so much so that one of his biographers in particular claims that Marshall McLuhan's entire theory of technology and the extension was cribbed right from the human use of human beings. And if you look at, if you're familiar with Marshall McLuhan's Understanding Media, which I think came out in the early 1960s, and then go back and reread The Human Use of Human Beings, you see all kinds of key words that are just popping out at you. So whether Norbert Wiener gets credit for it or not, he also is one of our great communication theorists of the second half of the 20th century. I have asked you to read the last two chapters of the book. There is a postscript that you can read. I provided the entire text for you. I have not reread the entire book in preparation for today's lecture, but I have given a careful perusal to Chapter 9 and Chapter 10. Chapter 9 takes us from the artisan making small machines at his lathe, driven by foot power on the table, and how those machines can then be turned to make other machines, which can then be turned to make other machines. And in this chapter 9, up until a point, we are dealing with a notion of technology which will resonate very well with Jacques Ellul, and that is that technology is kind of its own thing. It's kind of its own mimetic presence riding on top of human beings. And that certainly does, is certainly suggested by the first half of Chapter 9. But once he gets away from motive power, in other words, once he gets away from the water wheel and the steam engine, and he gets into electricity, that kind of corresponds with the research laboratory man who is beholden to his slide rule, his calculating device, and his formulas of amps, voltage, and watts, if nothing else. Chapter 10, the first two-thirds of it is how automated machines can be helpful in medicine to help diagnose illnesses. In this case, tremors of certain kinds, and to suggest solutions for age-old human problems such as deafness. And some people would say that mostly this book is dealing with the promise of the good stuff that's going to come out of automation and computers and so forth. But as you can see in both chapter 9 and in chapter 10, there is a strong dosage of caution also included in this presentation. Chapter 9, the first and second industrial revolutions. It describes a shift from the artisan to the engineer, from the hand worker who is skilled and can improvise on the basis of what he or she sees, to the engineer, which is basically a bit more theoretically orientated. The first industrial revolution uses the machine to replace muscle power, the second to replace some brain power. It also is taking us from the power of motion, like we get from a water wheel at a mill, going through a series of rods and pulleys and running all kinds of machines, to electrical power where you have the electrical machine right on, maybe several electrical motors right on the apparatus. It also goes from practical empirical experience to the theoretical and formulaic existence that one has inside of a research laboratory. And you might have noticed in chapter 10 that Norbert Wiener was very well connected to the Bell laboratories, a research laboratory. So he's not exactly criticizing them. He's simply cataloging a change in what it was like to be a technician in 1850 and what it was like to be a technician in 1950. Wiener uses a quasi-organic explanation, particularly in his description of primitive machines creating more and more complicated machines. Machines that can then create machines. This has echoes of evolution. And please bear in mind the quotation from cybernetics, that it is miraculous that one can use physiological explanations to talk about technology. In chapter 9, we see the human power of using your own body to perform work being replaced by mechanical power. And ultimately, human decision-making can be, in some measure, replaced by mechanical, machine-derived decision-making. The servo motor is held up as a very basic example of this. In terms of actual technologies that he focuses on in there, the steam engine gets a lot of press, as well it should, because Lewis Mumford, in his 1932 or 33 classic Technics and Civilization, basically begins in the coal mine with the invention of the steam engine to remove water from the mine. Wiener also spends a lot of time on what he calls the electron valve. If there are any guitar players out there, you guys would recognize these as tubes that are in your amplifiers. There is a certain kind of analog nostalgia attached to these devices, but basically transistors do the same thing, and that is the electron valve can amplify, it can add way more energy on the basis of a low input, and it also can punctuate, it can start, it can stop things. As I said, it can do what transistors do today. And this brings us into the possibility of computing machines being used in factories. Within Chapter 9, before I go to the next planche, I would like to share a couple of quotations. The first one is on page 148. And here he's talking about his practical experience with the anti-aircraft gun. Besides finding airplanes by radar, it was necessary to shoot them down. This involves the problem of fire control. The speed of the airplane has made it necessary to compute the elements of the trajectory of the anti-aircraft missile by machine, and to give the predicting machine itself communication functions which had previously been assigned to human beings. Thus, the problem of anti-aircraft fire control made a new generation of engineers familiar with the notion of a communication addressed to a machine rather than to a person. So this is kind of the opposite of the end of the fourth Star Wars movie, where Luke basically fires his missile without the aid of a machine, but he had all those special melanchlorian deals in his bloodstream to help him. But the practical solution is actually to take the human being and plug him or her into the machine for increased accuracy. I have a few more for you before we go to the next planche. On page 151. The development of these computing machines has been very rapid since the war. For a large range of computational work, they have shown themselves much faster and more accurate than the human computer. Their speed has long since reached such a level that any intermediate human intervention in their work is out of the question. Thus, they offer the same need to replace human capacities by machine capacities as those which we found in the anti-aircraft computer. The parts of the machine must speak to one another through an appropriate language, without speaking to any person or listening to any person except in the terminal and initial stages of the process. Here again, we have an element which has contributed to the general acceptance of the extension to machines of the idea of communication. I would like to put out, discuss two terms here. For a large range of computational work, they have shown themselves much faster and more accurate than the human computer. The computer used to be a person. Used to be a person who was very quick with a device called a slide rule. Go ahead and Google it and be amazed. And frequently, these computers were women. And their job was simply to, I'm an engineer, I got a math problem, you solve it for me. And so the computer was the mathematical equivalent of a secretary. The second element I would like to highlight is that there are no humans except in the terminal and the initial stages of the processes. And if there's anyone in this audience that is older than 45, they might remember when the contact area with a computer was called the terminal, because that is where the information went in and where it could come out. Okay, just two more passages very quickly from chapter 9. Of course, page 157. Of course, we assume that the instruments which act as sense organs record not only the original state of the work, but also the result of all the previous processes. Thus, the machine may carry out feedback operations, either those of the simple type now so thoroughly understood, or those involving more complicated processes of discrimination, regulated by the central control as a logical or mathematical system. In other words, the all-over system will correspond to the complete animal with sense organs, effectors, and proprioceptors, and not, as in the ultra-rapid computing machines, to an isolated brain dependent for its experiences and for its effectiveness on our intervention. In a word, when computers crawl out of their mainframe terminal and are presented with sense organs, we are in a completely different league. And in closing, well, not closing, but close to closing, on page 161, I've spoken of the actuality and the imminence of this new possibility. What can we expect of its economic and social consequences? In the first place, we can expect an abrupt and final cessation of the demand for the type of factory labor performing purely repetitive tasks. In the long run, the deadly, uninteresting nature of the repetitive task may make this a good thing and the source of leisure necessary for man's full cultural development. It may also produce cultural results as trivial and wasteful as the greater part of those so far obtained from the radio and the movies. So these machines can free us to develop our minds, or they can free us to spend the whole day watching YouTube videos about cats. Okay. Also, the chapter ends with a strong cautionary tale. Let us 162. Let us remember that the automatic machine, whatever we think of any feelings it may have or may not have, is a precise economic equivalent of slave labor. Any labor which competes with slave labor must accept the economic conditions of slave labor. It is perfectly clear that this will produce an unemployment situation, in comparison with which the present recession or even the depression of the 30s will seem a pleasant joke. Thus, the new Industrial Revolution is a two-edged sword. And he ends this chapter by pointing out that some of the captains of industry with whom he has been in dialogue are acknowledging that this is a problem and wish to take steps to fix it, or at least not make it so harmful. Chapter 9, chapter 10 is, well, first of all, I hope you enjoyed it, but I could understand if you found it a bit daunting, because Wiener is speaking incredibly practically in the first two-thirds of this chapter. He speaks of his creation of the moth and the bedbug, which are little tiny robots that would either seek out light or run away from light. And furthermore, he showed how he could um, confuse these systems so that they would imitate two varieties of tremors. Background noise tremors, such as you have in Alzheimer's, or intentional tremors where you overcompensate. Um, um, and so here, the robots that he created provided a valuable diagnostic tool for medical science. Then, in conjunction with some uh, patents at Bell Laboratories that had been unexplored, Norbert Wiener is trying to break down human communication, particularly vocal communication, into a highly simplified system whereby one could recognize a word not with the ears, but with a glove on the hands. This uses the device called a vocoder, which focuses on the articulation of the word primarily, and not on all the noise that is presented along with the word. Um, kind of like focusing more on consonants than vowels. Um, but ultimately, when he starts speaking of the intelligent machines, such as the chess machine, he becomes extremely uh, cautionary. Now, he doesn't use his own words here, but he uses the words of a French priest, Father Dubar, Pierre Dubar, and I will read from page 179, the last third of the middle paragraph. The machine au gouvernement will define the state as the best informed player at each particular level. And the state is the only supreme coordinator of all partial decisions. These are enormous privileges. If they are acquired scientifically, they will permit the state, under all circumstances, to beat every player of a human game other than itself by offering this dilemma: either immediate ruin or planned cooperation. This will be the consequences of the game itself without outside violence. The lover of the best of worlds have something indeed to dream of. Well, if you want an example of how this coercion works, I think we can go no further than the pressure that at least I experienced it as a pressure to get myself fully vaccinated. Um, but there are certainly others as well. Automatic cameras enable us to keep to the speed limit on the highway. Um, you could exhaust yourself coming up with examples of this. Okay, last paragraph I'm going to share with you. If a man with this tragic sense of hubris approaches not fire, but another manifestation of original power, like the splitting of the atom, he will do so with fear and trembling. He will not leap in where angels fear to tread, unless he is prepared to accept the punishment of the fallen angels. Neither will he calmly transfer to the machine made in his own image the responsibility for his choice of good and evil, without continuing to accept the full responsibility of that choice. Um, and here we are carrying over from Sisyphus, Prometheus, fallen angels. Indeed, the power of the thinking machines, the power of these communication devices are right up there with the splitting of the atom in terms of altering the fabric of human existence. And with these references to Greek mythology, with the ability, if not the desire, to imbue our machines with the responsibility for choice of good or evil, I can think of no better transition than to go quickly to Ex Machina. But before getting there, um, a quick look at some of the takeaways from cybernetics and the human use of human beings. Signals and messages like matter and energy are subject to their own degradation, their own entropy, their own decay. Humans in this matrix were originally largely used as discriminators, switches, and activators. Um, Whatever functions as a part of a machine is a part of a machine. So if you are on a factory assembly line, you are a part of that assembly line. You are part of that machine. And also, any labor which competes with slave labor must accept the economic conditions of slave labor. Okay, Ex Machina, relatively new film, still looks fresh today, and I should tell you right now that Ex Machina is lacking one word, and of course that is Deus Ex Machina, but God is not in the title. And in a peculiar way, God is not in the picture either. Um, in the plot of the movie, it occurs over 7 days. Um, and there is the removal of God, perhaps the death of God, if one wants to get into a Nietzschean perspective, at the end of the movie. I will tell you that if you go to my area of academic discourse, Ex Machina is treated as a very thinly veiled metaphor for God and man. So we have Nathan stating at the outset, one day the AIs are going to look back on us the same way we look at fossil skeletons on the plains of Africa. An upright ape living in dust with crude language and tools, all set for extinction. And here, in line with Norbert Wiener's speculation, Nathan, the alpha geek of the film, is using an evolutionary paradigm for technology. Caleb, in a similar conversation, if you've created a conscious machine, it's not the history of man, that's the history of gods. Very interesting here that we're now going to equate human existence and perhaps even the possession of a soul to consciousness. We do that. It's an interesting question. But Nathan quotes him later on with extreme hubris, with extreme tragic pride. You know, I wrote down that other line you came up with, the one about how if I've invented a machine with consciousness, I'm not a man, I'm a god. Well, that's not exactly what Caleb said, but nevertheless, there we are. Ava in terms of coming up with where we get Blue Book from. Named after Wittgenstein's notes, it's the world's most popular internet search engine, processing an average of 94% of all internet search requests. Please notice that Ava has two registers here. One is when she's just spewing stuff that she is channeling from Google, and the other stuff is when she's actually conniving deviously to control Caleb. All right. Um, Again, I want to save a lot of room for discussion here, so I'm not going to give a whole lot away. We have Nathan Bateman, um, kind of the typical .com billionaire, eccentric, really not as boring as Bill Gates, but we've got a Steve Jobs, Elon Musk vibe going on. Um, Oscar Isaac on a YouTube interview, or the actor who plays Nathan, he said he's the alphaist male, the alphaist alpha male, with the weightlifting and the hard drinking and the this and the that, and you know, yeah. Um, he is narcissistic, uh, and do note that he never ever approaches anyone on an equal level here. He's imprisoned Ava. He has given Kyoko no possibility of communication. And Caleb is really like, your typical A minus, B plus student who, capable but not original, and he's totally controlled based upon his search history, even implied that Ava would be able to access his preferences that he has expressed in a Google search. At very least, Nathan could. And then we have Ava, Rapunzel, let down your hair, I've said, even though she has no hair. But just like I have to ask the question, why does Deckard have to kill all the replicants? Why make survival and escape the tripwire for making a being conscious? There are plenty of conscious beings today who not only embrace but relish their slavery, in a manner of speaking. But okay, maybe some element of independent motivation. And also, why make consciousness the condition for passing the Turing test? There are others. Why the human form? Why the female form? Why equip her with drop-dead supermodel good looks, as well as erogenous zones? The computer that goes with humanity to Jupiter in Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey, Hal, he is kind of male sounding, but if you ask me, kind of male gay sounding, really, sort of androgynous. So why the human form? And I would maintain that this put Caleb in particular at a profound disadvantage. So the machine is to be deemed indistinguishable from a human, but how? The original Turing test could be done on a computer console, but now it's being done face-to-face. Also, Nathan really doesn't give Caleb a clear job. He's like, get to know her. Well, what's that? And the feedback is, well, What do you think? I mean, really. Uh, Caleb should have already recognized at that point that something wasn't quite um, scientific. Something was not quite clinical with his participation unless he was not the scientist looking at the rat in the maze, but himself the rat in the maze. Um, so if we have pre-programming, uh, Nathan is using Caleb's programming, his basic evolutionary architecture, to help the hot damsel in distress, in a word, uh, uh, and he has provided that insight to Eva. Uh, really, not much of a contest. So, in a sense, Caleb is really part of the apparatus, and he does react predictable to particular triggers. I suppose what Nathan didn't count on was how inventive Caleb would be with letting Ava escape. But the brother has still been played. Okay. Uh, if you haven't done the sheet, don't look at this planche and go do the seminar sheet and come back when you are ready. Okay, now you've done the seminar sheet. Just some elements that I had here. Uh, Rachel possesses memories, wakes into adulthood and demonstrates affection for a human, and she saves Deckard. Uh, Ava uh, doesn't have memories, but she does have the cloud data, and then she also has her own memories that she is accruing. But she has no life experience, and she cultivates affection from a human, but I don't think there is any question of her giving affection. To me, doesn't look like it. Perhaps with Kyoko, if she isn't just using her to as an ally, maybe she's being played too. Um, she murders Nathan, and then she abandons Caleb. I just hope that they have enough sushi in the freezer that Caleb doesn't starve to death right away and can find a way out of his quandary, but it certainly does not appear like it at the end of the movie. Deckard's job is to test androids. Caleb's job is to test androids. Deckard is sexually attracted to androids. Caleb is sexually attracted to androids. Deckard kind of saves Rachel at the end. Caleb kind of saves Ava at the end. Although I don't know how Ava is going to recharge her batteries once she is on the outside um, of Nathan's home. But I reckon she can jury rig something at a Tesla station if she's smart enough. The creator, Tyrell, eccentric, solitary head of a corporation, murdered by his creation. Nathan, eccentric, solitary head of a corporation, murdered by his creation. So, the story that we are telling ourselves about artificial intelligence. AF709 comes to us as a child, right? Doesn't know anything, needs to be guided. It has to have life explained to her. Rachel comes to us as a um, young, compassionate figure. And she is compassionate. I mean, she does save Decker's life in the movie. Uh, and Eva is shown to be calculating, manipulative, controlling, and deadly, deadly, fatal. The ultimate femme fatale. When we get in seminars, we can, if you wish, discuss these figures in terms of film noir heroines, but I have now used almost, well, not a clock hour, but an honest 56 minutes, and I think I will leave it there. I thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm greatly looking forward to our seminars together. Bye for now.